Hello.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing well. How
Okay, start video. There we go.
Hey.
Hey.
Oh my God. It's been so long.
Hey, Chris. Hey, Ken.
Hello.
How's everybody?
Good. I hope nobody takes offense that I didn't put on a suit for the interview time here. We're on COVID rules, right?
That's right.
I think as long as we're all wearing pants, right?
Oh, wait.
Well, you don't even have to wear pants.
Cameras I just want to
None of our business. Just your own. This is our business.
Right on.
There's been so many stories about, these people on these Zoom meetings. I think a reporter the other day captured her husband naked in the shower. There was, all these different things that are going on. So, but anyways, thank you all so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much, Ramona, for, bringing the story to my attention. I think it's a very important one and certainly worthy of discussing further and talking to people who are right in the middle of it, So we can, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, as you know, the author, Professor Elizabeth Bartholet, I invited her, but I haven't heard back from her. But I'll still keep, pinging her and see if she can give some input, which I'll include hopefully in my final report. So she's calling for some real change here, which is, and I don't know if you've been following the blogs about it or hearing what people are saying, but the conservatives are very, very upset.
When you reach out to her, you might want to refer to her as Betsy. As I understand it, all her friends call her Betsy. So that'll help you get an in on her paying attention to the email.
The next time I call her, I'm going to say, "Hey, Betsy."
I'm not joking, because I was curious who this person was, and I went out and I found some YouTube videos of her speaking at Harvard, and they introduced her as Betsy Bartholet.
Okay,
so, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, wow. She's making some claims. She's actually calling for the all-out banning of homeschooling. And, she brings up some very important points that people should consider. I haven't been a homeschooling parent. I am a parent, but have never homeschooled actually, I did have to homeschool my son for a little bit, but only because I had to deal with some racism in upstate New York at a school. And so it's just a small period I had to keep my son at home so I could find another school for him. But then I didn't, but that was only for that reason. So, but she's talking about issues like isolation, abuse, physical, sexual abuse, religious indoctrination, and racism, and false social sciences, and the data behind the whole homeschooling that shows that primarily is pretty successful. And she argues, well, of course they're going to say that. Most of the people that are saying it's successful are these big lobbying groups and these big advocacy firms that are pushing for more parents to homeschool and really cut out all regulation. And she talks about some rules that aren't even being followed. So they're only getting, when she talks about the data that's showing positivity in homeschooling, in the homeschooling community, she says that data is really flawed because they're only capturing those who report, because the rules surrounding homeschooling really are very loose. Parents can register or they don't have to register. They can just do whatever they want, basically. So I'd love everybody's thoughts, your input. We can start with Ramona and go from there. We go with Chris, and then we can go with Ken.
So just to give some background, we've been homeschooling. Oh, I think someone is trying to get in.
Okay.
I just saw a text come through.
Oh, yeah, there she is. Cool.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
No problem. So we started, my kids are now 11 and 9. We've been homeschooling. Hey, Sue.
Hi.
We've been homeschooling pretty much since the get-go. And our reasons for homeschooling were because we were dividing time between upstate New York and California. So it didn't make sense to pull kids in and out of school due to work projects. So that's how we started homeschooling. And just to address, some of the points raised and to go back to this, it's a really, really narrow palette, if you will, of homeschooling. It's a very, very narrow picture. I would like to think of one day beyond pandemic schooling where we've been home, where we don't leave the house, we don't talk to anyone, they don't have any other teaching influences present. Those days are rare. It's really only happened in the last 5 weeks because of our pandemic. But beyond that, the picture that's painted for homeschooling is it's extreme. And I'm sure those homeschoolers exist. And I think if you look long and hard enough, you will find extremes everywhere. But that's not the norm. I don't know anyone who homeschools like that. I'm sure they're there.
Do you register? Do you follow the rules?
Yeah.
Or
So being based in upstate New York, or being based in New York State, I register. I send a letter of intent in. Hi, I'm going to homeschool my children this year. They're entering, and I list their grades. And then I develop a curriculum plan. Now, my curriculum plan is based on New York State standards. So for each subject at each grade, I go through, here's the subject, here are the concepts we're covering, here are the goals I'm looking to accomplish by the end of their school year. So I submit all of that paperwork, and then I do quarterly reports. So for this quarter, we did, whatever in math, ELA, social studies, etc. And that goes through for the four quarters of school. And then at the end of the year, by the fourth quarter, I will send in an additional note saying, I'm either testing my children this year or I'm writing a narrative. So if it's a test, then my test is proctored. So it has to be proctored by, not the parent. I have used retired teachers, just like, hey, hang out, kids are going to take the test. I'm not present. Or if I've done a narrative, then here's a narrative, and then I will chat with a teacher that I know, someone that's, you have someone else. Someone that can go over and kind of go, okay, here's their portfolio, here's some work, here's samples, and here's my narrative, have a look at their work. And that's a pretty, and if I'm late with reports, which happens fairly frequently, it's an email into my contact at school district, we're running late, blah, blah, blah. But there's nothing loose. Hey, Isabella. I don't know you. Hi.
Hi, sorry. It wasn't connecting until I logged out again and then reconnected.
Ooh, there you go.
So I emailed you, so sorry about that.
That's okay. Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, there's nothing loosey-goosey about, homeschool requirements. It's pretty...
So you really
down. So
you're saying her findings or her report you don't agree with, and you don't agree that homeschooling should be banned, and you think her call for banning is extreme? Is that?
I think, and somebody else jump in here on this. I think banning is an interesting word. I think the words presumptive ban are kind of they're fairly inflammatory, because say something is presumptive means you're assuming it's true. So you're saying we have these findings of families who are homeschooling, and they have had these atrocities that have happened. Oh, you're homeschooling. You must be committing those same atrocities. This presumption of guilt. And I'm like, hang on a second. Whoa. We're talking about America and American ideals and American cultural values. And hang on, we have this thing called, innocent until proven guilty. A pretty American philosophy. I mean, it's Justinian. It's kind of how we base all of our legal system. You're saying, no, because we have this very narrow band, this extreme place where these homeschoolers live, right? So we have this range of homeschooling families. And here is this narrow extreme, and there are a bunch of folks in here. Oh, that must mean this entire spectrum of homeschoolers suddenly are in this one tiny extreme.
And by that argument, if that's the case, then we would also have to shut down public schools, because we know that there's abuse happening in public schools. But it's just simply not a valid argument.
She's very hypocritical.
And you know, it's funny. I just listened to an interview with Betsy Bartholet. She was talking to an RT News reporter who was questioning her about international adoptions. And, you know, as that interview wrapped up, her own argument was like, hey, you know, yes, there are schools everywhere. Yes, there are kids who are being abused, but you can't throw out the whole system just because you have this small percentage of kids that do have, you know, have problems, that we have this very small percentage. You can't throw, you know, the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And I was just like, wow, Betsy gets it, you know? She knows what I'm talking about. Because it's absolutely the case that she calls for tolerance, yet her conclusions are completely intolerant.
Yeah. Okay, so you don't.
I think that you're talking about a larger reflection, though, of a political narrative, and that's the same as in international adoption, that you're making assumptions about homeschoolers based on your assumption that they lean a political way. And I find that whenever people find out that we homeschool, they're just so flabbergasted that we become like an exotic parrot that they want to learn more about, because they just cannot process that my husband and I went to prep school, that we met at Princeton, that he went to Harvard Law School, and that we would choose to homeschool. They find that so mind-boggling, and literally they just hammer us with questions. I can't tell you, it happens all the time, that we are like the exotic bird.
I have to admit, there are times where I've ran into some homeschool parents, and I did find it foreign, for lack of a better word. So I've been one of those people that has been, you know, like, really, why? You know, just
Right. Well, I don't think that that's an unreasonable question, but I think asking why is the first step before judgment, and particularly in Massachusetts, you know, because I believe it was in 2006, they eliminated all of acceleration and gifted programming, except in about 2 districts, Framingham and Brookline, I think, maybe Bedford too. And so you have a whole spectrum of kids who need acceleration, and they can no longer receive it in the schools because the state decided it was elitist. So these kids are, and this is why we started homeschooling. Our oldest is on that gifted spectrum, and he showed all of this depression and anxiety because his brain wasn't met in school. And they said, oh, well, we can send him to the psychologist, but we're not required to meet his intellectual needs. So I know we have a large cohort of peers who we interact with who are homeschooling for the same reason, that you can meet the lower end of the spectrum in terms of academic needs, but not the higher end. And those kids similarly tend to be more special needs. Like when you get a very powerful brain, that doesn't mean that you're achievement oriented necessarily. It means that you might have deficits in other areas. So I think asking why you would choose to homeschool, like, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted him to go to school. I wanted to keep my job. And it just wasn't possible because it wasn't right for him to be in school. And trust me, we would love for him to be in school. We liked our school experience, but it just wasn't right for him. And I think asking the question, what is right for your child? I'm not weighing in on whether, you know, what you feed your child or whether you vaccinate your child. That's your own business. Like, that's not my business. And as a parent, you're making the best choice for your child's needs. And particularly in homeschooling, that tends to be deeply tied to their emotional well-being and psychological well-being.
in the article, she's calling for no individuality. They want everybody to be the same and schooled the same with the same curriculum at the same time without taking anything into account of what that child needs. And I think what Isabella was also saying, and to further that, is kids that are on the accelerated track their needs aren't being met. But a lot of time, kids that are on the low end aren't being met either.
Right.
The services aren't available, and they tend to fall through the cracks.
Yeah, and we have we have four kids, and 2 are adopted from Ethiopia. So we have 2 Black girls, and we know a lot of people in the Boston area who are choosing to remove their children of color from the school system so that they can change the dialogue of how children of color are quote unquote managed in the school system. Like the girls are sexualized, the boys are punished. I mean, we see this in private and public school systems. By removing them from school system, not only can they change what the educational dialogue is and how they're discussing colonization and the history of our nation, but they're also changing the social and emotional handling of children of color, which I think is huge. And they can say, no, we're not going to, this is not acceptable to us. We're not going to continue to participate in this. There's a growing, very vocal group in this area for that constituency.
And if we were to go by Bartholet's, conclusions, what she's saying is that the state is responsible for setting our societal values, and that we don't have a right to pull our children out of that conditioning, because that makes us one nation. We all need to have the same values. And then out of the other mouth, she says that we have to practice intolerance. So the entire her article was massively inflammatory from the very beginning. I mean, she refers to the homeschooling of children, these homeschooling families, as a homeschooling regime. Right?
I noticed that.
Just the way that she colors it, right? And I think there was there's like a spelling error on the picture of there was an article that covered it, right? I'm like, really? Because clearly we don't know. I mean, I don't know. Did the editors miss that, or somebody doesn't know how to spell, right? But I don't think homeschooling families.
Yeah. Yeah, what she's saying is, I mean, she is calling for a ban, but she's also saying if there isn't a ban, that the burden of showing justification for homeschooling should lie solely on the parents. And she really criticizes the movement, the homeschooling movement and advocacy groups, who she says are incredibly aggressive in demanding that elected officials stay out of their business and stay out of their way of raising their children the way they see fit. What are your thoughts on that?
She really made it sound like, especially with the HSDLA, that they were advocating maltreatment of children. And I didn't like how any of that was worded. And honestly, I'm pretty sure that group doesn't advocate for maltreatment of children, but that they don't want to give an inch to the government because they'll take a mile. And that, they don't want any oversight or more than there already is.
And I think that goes back to what the political issue that you have, because there's a very strident group politically that says, I don't want government oversight of other parts of their lives, and in particular certain areas of the country. I think that she's just making gross assumptions about who this group of people is, and it's so diverse. I mean, I don't know any homeschooler who homeschools the way that we do, and I know that that's the case for each homeschooler whom I know. We have intersections, but we don't. None of us do the same thing. We're all homeschooling for very personal, individual reasons, and
but what we have in common is that we have the best interests of our children at heart.
Right.
I've homeschooled in Illinois and Texas, which are very low monitored states, and also in New York. And now I'm outside of Dubai and in the United Arab Emirates, and I've homeschooled the same every place, regardless of what the state tells me I need to be doing. And I'm doing it because I think I know what's best for my children. So while I was in New York, I did have to turn in the paperwork and I did have to do all their testing and jump through all their hoops. But I used the exact same books and curriculum that I did in Illinois, where I say nothing to anybody.
She's also, here in Massachusetts, for example, where she is, it's district by district. It's not even like the state has one mandate for how you homeschool. We lived in one city and now we've moved into Cambridge. We abut Harvard. Like, there's no standard of what you do or do not have to do by district, and it is by district. So to even say that there needs to be greater oversight, there isn't even oversight in the state that she's in. And some districts in Massachusetts do have very strict oversight. But the fact that she's not aware of that is a little bit problematic.
Sue?
Well, she has no faith in the state either. She wants federal.
Yeah.
Sue, would you like to add anything?
Just overall,
Sure.
I think the only thing I could relate to was on, I think it was page 10. There was one paragraph that described everyone that I know that homeschools. Like, for the rest of the pages, I couldn't relate at all. I don't know anyone that was described in that article. Everyone that I know homeschools for completely different reasons, like Isabella said. So I don't know anyone that homeschools for religious reasons personally. I know that when I started homeschooling my son, I did it because I wanted him to learn in the best way he could. And so I was really interested in like the Montessori principles and the Reggio Emilia. And I did a lot of research and I tried a lot of different things with my son until I found the thing that he thrived in. And as we went on, we joined co-ops and we did outside activities, but I started doing like a curriculum at home. And again, I'm in New York State, so I would say it's pretty rigorous, registrative properties that you have to follow through all through the year. But everyone that I know does it for different reasons. There's people with neurodiverse kids that learn in completely different ways. Maybe they have sensory issues that aren't dealt with in the schools. I honestly have known people whose kids go to public school, and one in particular had issues with her son being dyslexic, and it was never addressed in the public school system. So she actually had to do that on her own and remove him from the school system and place him in an outside alternative school, even just to deal with reading and writing that he could actually do. And these are basic concepts that you would assume public school to be addressing. So there's people that run the gamut on why they homeschool. So to read an article like this was almost laughable to me because I can't relate to it at all as a homeschooling parent. It was actually very shocking. And to me, it's a totally stereotypical, generic, outdated view of what it means to homeschool, because there's so many different reasons and intents and philosophies out there now that people are doing amazing things with their children, homeschooling and alternative methods that I just, I had to shake my head at the whole thing.
Yeah.
I really was like totally baffled. I think it's really unfortunate too, because it's super ignorant and super naive. And there's
And
really
so disrespectful.
Oh yeah, to me, there was no truth in that. And it loses anything about what it's like to teach your own kid. I mean, you really don't get any sense about like the passion that people have about homeschooling children. And I thought it was laughable at the end that she brings it back to, well, these children should have rights, right? We should and which to me, it's like, well, that's an amazing concept, right? I'm not against that at all. But if you interview my son right now, you ask him, what do you want to do? How do you want to learn? He will tell you he loves to be homeschooled. He loves the opportunities it gives him that he wouldn't have in a structured public school.
Right.
The whole thing with him was that he could learn what he loves at any age. There would be no one telling him he cannot learn about dinosaurs because you don't get to learn about them until third grade, right? He's in third grade now. He can learn about things that you wouldn't learn until you were in seventh grade. It's totally up to him. So that's a big, for me anyway, that was a big part of why we homeschooled.
Now, would you consider the group of you, all of you, all are homeschoolers, some all the way in Dubai and all across the country, would you consider yourself the exception or the norm. I mean, no system is foolproof. So there's certainly pitfalls even in homeschooling. Sure, certainly there are some kids that fall through the cracks, or parents who don't take homeschooling seriously as you all do. Can you talk a little bit about those pitfalls, if you've seen any of them, if you've come across the parents that you're saying, gosh, I wish that kid was at school, or they're not doing a good job? Is there any validity in her report that you can walk away with and say, yes, there is an improvement needed?
I mean,
I
according
feel like I'm,
oh, go ahead.
no, that's fine.
I was just going to say that reading some of the things that she wrote in the report, to me, were horrific. So there is, validation on her part that she's witnessed this, maybe through her background, that she knows something about these homeschool specific families that she cited where kids were, not taken care of. For a family to be able to homeschool a child when CPS knew historically that they've been abusive, I mean, that's incomprehensible to me. So but I can't vouch for that. I've never witnessed something like that within my own homeschool, communities, all the co-ops that we've been to. Yes, there are people that are homeschooling for religious reasons. I don't know them personally, but I know they're there. I've, been in co-ops with diverse people, and I would say probably half of them have religious intent. But then the other half homeschool for completely different reasons. So this 90% of homeschoolers, I don't know if that's really true. I can't say.
And what would it matter, right? I mean, if people are homeschooling for religious reasons, why does she point that out as a bad thing? Like,
I don't know.
We guarantee the freedom of religion in this country. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah. I think she's connecting it to a sense of isolation of the kids and taking away the child's right to have diverse views and diverse opinions from outside sources. And I thought that was very interesting that she was basically saying, listen, your kids don't really belong to you. I got the sense of that she was saying parents should not think that children that they bear really belong to them.
You asked about her statement regarding that, like, somehow it should be the homeschooling parents, the burden should be on us to prove that we're worthy of teaching our children. I find that really, it's offensive. It's offensive to my notion as an American, but also it's laughable. Given the current state of affairs in central New York, where I'm from, the illiteracy rates between ages 5 to 8 are atrocious. And so, if anybody has a burden of proof that they need to prove to me that they're worthy of educating my kids, it's our public school system right now, which is failing us. It's failing so many American kids. So. And I think that's also a really interesting thing to note, is that she doesn't focus really all that much on the educational value or the fact that we're moving from a one-size-fits-all public school system into a very dynamic and, if I can use a modern catchphrase, agile kind of learning environment, which is what the homeschool environment is. I think it was Sue that said she went through several different curriculums until she found something that fit. Could you imagine how much money that would cost if we tried to do that in a public school system? It would never happen. Yeah. So I think
there's no capacity for that for the number of the different learners.
My sister and my brother-in-law are both teachers in Florida. And so I'm hearing the troubles and the trials that they're going through, and I applaud them for their efforts and their sacrifice. Really, they're underpaid, they're overworked, and they've worked in some horrible city school systems where threats have come in against them. It's from kids, and it's the forced nature of the public school system, and then compare it to the free nature of homeschooling. And with the advent, the increase in our ability to use technology, I think that more and more people are going to be homeschooling. I think that she has a valid point when she says, hey, a lot of our first responders are teachers. And maybe that is an issue, but the notion that just because all of a sudden we're not going to have those teachers available to be first, the first people to notice that there's a problem doesn't mean that no one else is going to step forward. And it also doesn't remove the burden from us as a society to make sure that kids aren't being abused. So like if the school was the watchtower, there's something else has to become the watchtower as the school fades away. But to cling to an outdated system just because of its supposed value, I think that would be a mistake.
Did you notice in most of her?
Sorry.
Did you notice in most of her cases where she says we need CPS and we need the teachers to mandate report and all of this, otherwise the homeschoolers are going to fall through the cracks and they're going to be beaten and abused. But in all of the cases that she cited, she said, well, CPS was involved for 10 years. And CPS was known, this family was known to CPS, and it had nothing to do with homeschooling and everything to do with abuse. And CPS dropped the ball.
And abuse can happen with a child in public school. There's abuse that when you go to public school, kids get abused in public school.
Right.
This is not a separate thing to homeschoolers, and neither is racism or sexism or any of the things that she quotes as homeschooling encompassing. People with Christian conservative values can send their kid to public school. This is not a specific homeschool thing. That's society. If she has a problem with society as a whole, then that's a whole different thing than focusing it on homeschoolers, right? I mean,
hurt people, right? Hurt people, and there's a lot of hurt kids in the public school system. And I, for one, as a parent, I don't want to subject. Like, people say, "Oh, well, where's your kid going to get socialized?" We found several really good co-ops in our area where we mingle with all kinds of families. We take the best minds from our community, and everybody's teaching something different. So my kids aren't just getting schooled by me and my wife; they're getting schooled by an entire community of people. This is how Alexander the Great was educated, right? This idea of small groups of people being educated by some of the best minds in the area, this isn't a new idea. This is the best way to possibly school kids. And to suggest that somehow that there's all these problems where there aren't, and we got to scrap the whole thing because there were some problems. Well, if that's the case, then we're going to be scrapping a lot of things in our society.
Right.
Do you think that, sorry, Ramona, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, one of the things when you talk about children and children's rights and homeschooling negating their choice, I mean, homeschooling allows you to meet the kid where they are. You can teach across disciplines based on an interest. I have a kid who is into rocket aviation and military planes. He can recite for you planes as he sees them. And I can go across ELA. I can go across history. We can work on math. I can work on physics, history of aviation. It's all there. But I can meet him where he is. Mm-hmm. I could try putting him in school where he would be the kid who is distracted. He'd be the kid who couldn't sit still. I'd have the teacher calling me, "Hey, your kid's a problem." And I've had that kid because I have older kids, and we had those calls. "Hey, I'm sorry, so-and-so didn't write his homework down. Oh, he lost his planner." Okay, well, no, he couldn't write it down in his notebook because he didn't, it wasn't the planner. And I remember having this conversation with my son Luke at like 12 or 13. "Hey, what's up with the homework?" He says, "It doesn't actually matter because we get makeup day and I can just do all my homework on that day and they can't fail me. Otherwise, they're going to get a bad review. So I'm just going to do all my homework that day." Seems like a really efficient way to do it. And can I tell you, I can't fault him. His logic was flawless. He's like, he looked at the system.
Kids need to learn to game the system, right? You have to learn to game the system early.
And I'm like, he was 12 years old at the time going, okay, all right, I guess. What are you going to say? Where's the flaw in his logic? So to suggest that, their needs aren't being met by this approach to education is almost, it is laughable because I'm like, at the end of the day, in a lot of ways, they drive their learning. They drive their learning almost, I'd say 90%, because.
And it goes back to the original stereotype of that we're sitting in the house like this quarantine situation,
well,
sitting with their books all the time. I mean, homeschoolers are going crazy just as much as kids who are usually in school at home are going crazy. Like
Yep.
we're never at home. We're out at classes, we're at a co-op, we do extensive theater, we do water polo. I mean, we have the bandwidth to do all these other things that we wouldn't because we can condense our academic work. But we have classes, we see people. Like it's not us with a whip in our house saying, do your math or you're going to go in your cage. I mean, I think, again, it goes back, people say all the time, you know, is your child socialized? My child is perfectly comfortable speaking with a 2-year-old or an 80-year-old because they interact with a diverse group of people. They're comfortable, they're respectful, and it just, again, goes back to the stereotypes that they're sitting in a room with us and nobody else, and that's where the abuse comes in.
The only thing in that in Bartholet's paper that I could agree with was her compassion to try and help children. I think her heart's in the right place. I just think that her solutions are all basically tired, old status solutions of trying to like micromanage the family, and this idea that if there isn't a law to manage something yet, then, well, we need to get a law to manage that. And the way that our government is constructed is the opposite, right? We want to minimize the amount of laws. We want to leave as much power as we can in the hands of the people and the family, because the further away from the individual the power becomes, the less impersonal it becomes, and the more likely it becomes corrupt. And given oversights, right? I mean, we all need checks and balances, and that's what the government is doing. But when she talks about like the balance of power and how the child is this one entity that's not that has no power, and they're at the hands of their parents. God help us, it's like, who better to have the majority of the power over than the parents? Or I would never want to subject the world's children to some sort of government entity that doesn't understand that this person has a problem sitting still, or this person, right? I mean, we see what public school systems have done for us is they've given us something to see that there is a lot of shortcomings and we need to overcome them. One size cannot fit all. One of the something that's hardly ever challenged about public school systems, at least from my point of view, is this idea of how we move kids through the school system based upon their age.
Yes.
I mean, for me as a child, I remember my English skills and my ability to interact with people was very high. My math skills lagged behind, and that hurt me all the way through my academic career. With our girls, if they're doing better at math or in language arts or something, and they're lagging behind in something, they don't suddenly fall behind, right? Like, they can continue to advance in what they're advancing in, and they can continue to work at whatever level they are. And what I'm finding is that there are occasional spurts that happen, and then like they get their level increases. It might not still be to where I would like it to be. I'll admit we have one of our daughters is a micro preemie, and she's maybe a year to a year and a half behind where she would be if she was like a full-term baby, and if she went through like a normal track of education. But you know what? She's not stigmatized. She doesn't, she's not even aware, unless she's over here in this conversation now, right? She's not even aware that that there's anything different, right? She has a self-esteem to interact with her peers, and she's learning at her level. If we forced her into a public school system, there's just no way that would have happened. She would have massively been stigmatized. It would have most likely impacted her ability to learn, and she would have forever been the girl who was left behind a year. And the reality is, a lot of kids, if they're when they're five, they're really almost at first grade or maybe even second grade level on some subjects. Why not allow them, based upon their ability, to excel as far as they can, as fast as they can, and recognize, though, that at some point that may lag and stagnate, right? It's like, because that's the other thing. We take gifted kids, and when we do accelerate them, then we expect that they're going to just keep on going at that rate. But that's not how people learn. That has nothing that does not reflect my education at all. I'll go through even as an adult now, I'll go through periods of really struggling with something, and then something clicks, and I have a Zoom period where I just completely learn a new technology. and then something will stagnate for a while. I have these moments of where it's just kind of like plateaued and then a spike and plateaued, and everybody's different. And only homeschooling, I think, can actually address this and nurture this in kids. I love, and I'll shut up after this quote. So there's, I don't remember who it came from, and maybe one of you do, but there's this idea that, you know, educating a child, it's more about kindling or building a fire within the child than it is about trying to fill a bucket. And the way I see the public school system is that all the kids are vessels, and we're trying to fill them up as much as we can, and then we put them up to the next level. And we try to fill them up as much as we can. Whereas with homeschooling, what I see is like, I'm trying to encourage my kids to get excited about something, and then I'm feeding that fire as it can grow. And if it can't grow, then I let it die down and I wait. And then when it's ready to be fed some more, I give it some more. Only a parent can do this for a kid, you know, or very small groups. You can't do it on a wide scale.
And, you know, some people would even argue, I've been a substitute teacher, and I've seen some of the curriculum and how, especially charter schools, teach their children, and it seems very militarized, where it's just about following orders and, you know, saying a mantra, and they have these phrases and saying that seems so just generic. They seem like they're building soldiers and followers, no real, you know, and honestly, when I was teaching in the charter schools, I was really surprised by that. Here in Washington, D.C., there's, you know, the way they teach the majority African-American kids in these charter schools here is really quite frightening and eye-opening because of how they're doing it. It is incredibly militarized. It isn't about independent thinking, but about follow the orders, you know, it's very regimented, just, you know, what do we do? And there are even phrases that say, you know, if you hear my voice, clap once. If you hear my voice, clap twice. If you hear, you know, and so but the kids act completely wild. But when they hear these little phrases, like little robots, they're like, okay, yeah, let's get back. You know, it's not organic. It's not an organic experience, more of a militarized experience that I've witnessed. And it reminds me of, you know, taking orders and just following them, don't think and just do. And do you think that's what she's advocating for, that new world order where we just, as American as a whole, we just sit, follow orders, you know, follow the leader, listen to what everybody says, and we all move and what, like, disregarding all the different parts that make us Americans?
I mean, I think that she
stated that in her paper.
And isn't that what public school was set up to do? It was set up to teach kids to learn how to act in order, to work in the factories in the Industrial Revolution. I mean, that's what it was set up to do. It hasn't really been revised, you know, that much. Maybe you give a kid a computer now, you know, I mean, but you're basically doing the same kind of setup that they've been doing since I was in public school. I mean, I went to public school. I didn't have a problem with going to public school. Now I went to college. I mean, it's not like homeschoolers are against formal education. You know, it's just you decide as you go when you have children what's best for my child. You know, and that's what really comes out. But knowing the background of what public education is and how it was set up, it's exactly what you're saying. I mean, that's how it was set up.
Now, what about the data? She talks about data. And she says the data on homeschooling is flawed because we're only getting a snapshot, and only from those that are actually reporting or, you know, going above and beyond and following the rules. Like, those the exception, not the norm. Is there any validity to that? Do you guys want to talk about that, about the actual data? Is it real? Is it just anecdotal evidence of homeschooling from advocacy groups?
What is the data? I'd like to know. Well,
Yeah,
I'd love to know data.
Well, the data,
I listened to a podcast earlier that did. I have to write down numbers. If I don't write down numbers, I'll misquote something off the top of my head. So I'm not going to tell you what the numbers were, but the report that I heard was actually talking about her refusal to accept the data, and in that report they threw out the numbers, and the numbers sounded great for homeschoolers. I mean, I can't give you the numbers, but the numbers it was a very large amount of people that were studied over a good amount of years. And if it's helpful, I think I got an invite from you via email. I can send you a link to the YouTube thing that I watched. It was 5 minutes. It was 5 minutes long, but basically it was really, they're saying that the numbers are valid and that there was a really good study done, and they're showing that the homeschoolers do as well, if not better than their public school counterparts in college level participation and success.
But that's what she took issue with. She says that the data is flawed because that data only comes from parents who are registering and actually reporting. It is not coming from the entire community of homeschoolers.
But where are you allowed to not register? I mean, where is she getting that information? That's just an assumption of like some weird cult of people who aren't registering the children, like some bizarre polygamist society that she's making up.
No, there's a number of states that don't
I was
register.
gonna say.
Illinois and Texas, which I've homeschooled both, are not registering states.
So it's possible that it could go both ways in Illinois and Texas, for example. So you could have kids that make it to college and do great, and you could have kids that don't.
Mm-hmm.
But our public school systems are no different. We've got lots of kids that go to college. So I don't like it. I think it is difficult to compare.
She doesn't like that. She doesn't think it's good data because she doesn't like it, and it doesn't prove her point. I think it's good data.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I want to jump in with, I mean, America, and I say this as a Canadian, America is a funny beast. It is 50 states with very differing perspectives on things. So yeah, some states you don't have to report. You submit a letter, and you never have any checks and balances. But here's my question. There are a lot of kids going off to college who, when you apply to a community college, if you're not doing SATs, you have to write the placement test, which is, I think it's AccuPlacer. So you write a placement test, and every possible college will tell you there are kids flunking out of college because they're failing their placement test, which means then they're doing college, they're doing developmental prep classes, which means they have now spent all their financial aid on prep classes. You can't take credit-bearing courses until you finish your prep, which at that point, as the student, you're like, forget it, I'm done. I'm frustrated. I can't do what I came here to do. And oh, by the way, you're telling me that I spent all my high school years not being prepared for college?
I had to take some of those math classes after I got out of the Air Force and I decided to go back to college. I had to take some of those placement classes for mathematics.
Yeah, we did one this week for the sixth grader. It was fun to do.
How was
They did okay.
But I'm a product of the public school system.
So
I really would never think to blame the public school system, though. It's clearly there's a part of the system that did fail me. But I'm a kind of person that feels that I have to take responsibility for my successes and my failures. And for whatever reason, I've just always had a block when it comes to calculus. It's just not clicked with me. Yeah.
What about the racism element? She talks about the racism element. Can you talk about that? I mean, there's also, there's arguments to be made against the public school system too when it comes to racism, because majority of Black kids are being taught by white teachers. We don't have enough Black teachers in schools. But she specifically talks about racism, which has always been a problem in this country, continues to be a problem in this country. Can you all talk about that as homeschoolers?
Well, again, in our area, one of the biggest growing groups, and there are articles nationwide that say that the people of color, Black homeschoolers, are like the largest growing group because they can change the conversation. And I think that just goes again back to her stigma that you have these white evangelical homeschoolers, and also because we have internationally adopted children, and that brings us into a group that does have a lot of evangelical people. They do homeschool, and I have to say they're extremely rigorous. Like they follow a curriculum that requires a lot from their children, and their politics and mine don't mesh, but they're certainly educating their children and not leaving them like bereft in the dirt in the woods. So I just think that her general approach of who the homeschooler is, that there are these closeted white racist people living in a rural community, is just so stereotypical and biased. It's remarkable.
I find it amusing that she says this, and she is a white female at an Ivy League school. So I'm talking like, hey, if you're going to talk privilege and racism and white supremacy, you kind of are the epitome of that in some ways. And speaking as a person of color, I can't say I've experienced any racism in any homeschooling community that I have been a part of. And we, like I said, we've been homeschooling for going on, 6-7 years. I don't know that I've ever experienced it.
I just find it so strange that she's at Harvard. I mean, many of the homeschoolers in this area are participating in Harvard Extension for high school. Those are the classes they're taking to go to high school. Like, it's just not accurate.
I've certainly known a lot of racist people in my life. And one thing I can say about educated people is that there's two things that we really don't stand for. People who hurt kids and racism. And my experience is that everybody that I know that's homeschooling, they're above the cut. They're above average in intelligence. I know no one in our homeschooling circles that's racist or not loving to their kids. No, because it requires so much commitment on behalf of the parents. It is.
Like, there is no way. It's such a huge choice. It's a family choice. It's a family commitment. It's a huge commitment. So to be abusive in that capacity, you could be completely negligent and just let your children be feral, but I don't know any homeschoolers like that. And frankly, by homeschooling, because the reasons for homeschooling are diverse, our co-ops have kids with special needs, with profound special needs, all different religions. Like, I myself have gotten to be friends with people who are Muslim, who I don't interact with. I don't know why, in where we live, but the groups are much more diverse than self-selecting, like, sort of socioeconomic brackets, like in Cambridge where we are, for example. It's just very strange to make that assumption, because you're choosing a group of people who has individual needs, and those are individuals. They're not in a specific socioeconomic bracket. They're not a specific religion necessarily. They're not a specific race. So you get a very interesting melting pot of people participating.
Yeah, I can definitely vouch for the religion. I've never met anyone who was Muslim, and atheist and agnostic and all different kinds of religions that my son has learned so much about by his friends believing in different beliefs. So in that realm, it's been amazing, that he's had that experience with the variety and the diversity of kids that he's gotten to become really good friends with through specifically co-ops. I mean, co-ops are like these amazing social outlets where, they can all take classes and have recess periods and gym classes and just like you would in public schools. But, and then they have that social interaction, and they can, have great bonding friendships with kids all over the place. And we're not even, some of the co-ops that I'm joined to are like an hour away, and he gets to meet all over, so it's been great.
As opposed to a public school where you're most often in your neighborhood, which means it's completely socioeconomic in terms of who you are with. And then if you're in a private school, that means that you either cannot pay at all, or you are in the highest income bracket to be able to pay that kind of tuition.
Yeah.
So to me, if you actually look at what diversity is, you either have a forced diversity in a private school that's extremely segregated by income, or you have just these little pockets that, in my experience, being in the suburbs, it was all white, and then in the city, it's based on how much you're paying to where you live.
Yeah.
So it's not authentically diverse, and homeschooling is driven by this need to support your child where they are intellectually and emotionally, and that's blind in terms of religion and ethnicity and race. It's just a parental commitment.
And one of the things I wanted to mention, which was really, again, something else foreign until I moved to the States, you can be anywhere in Canada. You can go to any public school. I went to public school. I started 10th grade there. It doesn't matter where you are. You're pretty much guaranteed you're gonna get a good school. Whether you're in the suburbs or you're in like downtown Toronto or wherever, you're gonna get a pretty good school. It doesn't matter. And this concept of having your zip code tied to the quality of education and the funding that you get for stuff, that is mind-blowing. And it's also like, oh, really? So if I live in Oneida, New York, population 9,000, I'm going to get less funding versus if I live in Manhattan, in Upper West Side. I mean, that doesn't scale. So then my kid's going to go off to school, and if you have a girl, guaranteed that girl is going to sit there. She's going to follow instructions. She's going to do the work. Like my kid, if I put her in public school, she would do all the work, and then she just sit there, go, okay, I'm done. Now what? Well, I'll just wait here until everybody else catches up. So what does she do? She twiddles her thumbs for 35 to 50 to 45 minutes. You know, so this idea, to go back, sorry, I totally missed my point. The point is with the racism issue, because you're guaranteed wherever you go, it's pretty good. You have a really good mix, right? You have a really good mix of diversity. So, and I find if you're in the States, you're not guaranteed that. We lived in Mountain View, and some friends of ours lived on the poor end of town. The poor end of town is where your house cost under $1 million. The upper end of town is where your house was $1.5 million and up. And these are not big houses, these are apartments. And her neighborhood school was primarily Hispanic, Latino, all of the working class that supports Google, all the restaurants, etc. And she's like, yeah, okay, so this is my neighborhood school. And I'm going, oh, okay. And she's like, yeah, we have no funding for arts. Like you have parents fundraising because they can't have music classes. Like all of these things that you think of as normal in the homeschooling world, and you're going, oh, but you're in Mountain View. Like the average income of someone in Mountain View is easily 185 to 225. Like it's not little money, it's big money. You know, and I'm going, your house cost what? And this is your neighborhood school. So, you know, there are so many, I'm losing my train, so I'm going to stop. There are just so many flaws.
So anything else that you guys would like to add? I'd like to, if there's anything you'd like to say to Betsy, Professor Betsy Bartholet, you know, please, everybody, you know, go ahead and, you know, make your statement. And, you know, before we end, I'd like for you all to let me know where each and every one of you are calling in from. So, Ken, why don't you start since you're the top of my list?
Something to say to Betsy. So, Betsy, I think your heart's in the right place, but I think your solutions are deeply flawed and they're un-American. I think that that the paper that you wrote was probably not your worst work, and I wish you would pull it back somehow because it's I think it's an embarrassment. It really is. I think it's an embarrassment based upon other things that I've heard you say and the care that you seem to have for children. I'm Ken Walling. I'm calling in today from Syracuse, New York, and I'm a homeschooler, ex-Air Force, and small business owner.
Thank you. Ramona?
Betsy, you know, I want to say that extremes are going to exist. And if you look to the extremes for the norms, you're not going to find it there. Extremes are bad no matter which way you slice them. And homeschooling is no different, but you cannot look to extremes and take that as the everyday norm. I'm a homeschooler. I'm calling in from Fayetteville, New York. I'm a documentary filmmaker and a writer. And the other thing I want to mention is that everyone approaches homeschool as a way to enhance their children's academic experience. And our children's needs are at the front of every academic decision we make.
Sue?
I don't really have much to say to Betsy. I would definitely say that she does not represent me in her article in any way, shape, or form. And she doesn't represent anyone that I know homeschooling today. I live in central New York, near Hamilton.
All right, Isabella?
I would say, why don't you come over and meet my children who are homeschooled? I live on Professor's Row. I abut Harvard's Graduate School of Design, and I'd love to introduce you to some real-life homeschoolers in your backyard who are taking advantage of many of Harvard's resources to educate their children. See, this is one of them. And I would love for you to see the diversity of the community that's here, and hear from my husband and I. We met at Princeton. I'm a creative director for major retail companies. My husband is a partner in a law firm in Boston and graduated from Harvard Law School.
Very cool. And Chris?
I would task her with trying to keep in mind and look for the individuality instead of trying to lump every kid the same. And take into account that everybody has different needs and that we're trying to meet those needs. I'm calling in from Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates.
Wow, that's pretty far. What time is it at your end?
It's about 1 a.m.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the
Sure
time
thing.
to engage me and all of us. This was so informative. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much, Ramona. Let's take a group picture. See if I can do this. Everybody say, hi, Betsy.
Hi, Betsy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I will send everybody a link to the report. Once I get it all together, I'll still be working to reach out to the professor and hopefully get her input because, this is certainly not to attack her, but just to certainly take issue where issue needs to be taken. And I think that's basically what this engagement is all about. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you for what you do for your children. I think all of this makes us better humans and ultimately will make us a better country. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanette. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice. Thank you.